What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin.
And we are back once again with yet another retro review. Once again, this is the time of year where we like to kind of dig around and find some, maybe overlooked gems of the past or bands that simply only had a very short career and we couldn't possibly rank them because that would be just a really short video.
Right. I rank this number 1.
Out of 1.
All right. Bye.
And once again, we found another one that I've been wanting to go over for a while because, it comes from a scene that I definitely will be going over in States Metal with the whole Illinois scene. And that album is Morgue with their lone full-length Eroded Thoughts. Now, before we get into the album itself, this band formed in 1990 in Plainfield, Joliet, and Chicago, kind of all those local neighborhoods. It's all kind of in the same area. Well, you can just say Chicago. I think we'd be fine. Now, in terms of information on this band, there's very little. I looked around, and basically what I came up with was very bare bones. The first known lineup of this band was one Brad Boldak on bass and vocals, Ted Van Tilburg on drums, and then guitarists Daniel Moore and Tom Theirs, or Theirs. It is literally spelled Theirs. I don't know how to properly say that. We're just going to go with Theirs because Theirs seems weird. Now, this lineup recorded their first 2 demos, Random Decay in 1991 and Severe Psychopathology in 1992. And pretty much all the demo tracks they recorded ended up on the full length anyway, so there really wasn't any need to go over the demos unless we wanted to hear more raw versions, which we kind of skipped them just because they were already here anyway. Now, at some point in 92 or 93, Ted and Tom exited the band and they were replaced by Nick Sebak on drums and Ryan Jerzak on guitars. And then this lineup would head to Solid Sound Studio in Illinois and record their album Eroded Thoughts, which was released in 1993. Again, another one I couldn't find a specific date. Believe me, I looked. But 1993 will have to do, and this was on Grindcore International Records, which sounded familiar to me because we actually brought them up in the Crowbar ranking, because I believe that was where Crowbar really got their start. Now, this is an album I have owned for a while because it was reissued a while ago, and I picked it up 3-4 years ago, and I'm still pretty familiar with this one, though it had been a little while since I jammed it. But once again,
what do you guys think? Do you think I've heard this record? I'll give you a moment. Talk amongst yourselves. The answer is no. But as always, I feel like I have listened to this record because it sounds like a whole bunch of bands that I am already familiar with. So, ha!
Fair enough. I mean, this is flat out 90s death metal. Though I wouldn't call it like meat and potatoes.
No.
This is actually probably more technical than I remembered it. Immediately, the first band that I think of in terms of a comparison to this band, just this album in general, is a band like Oppressor. Oppressor definitely kind of bridge the gap between like straightforward, just mean, gritty, dirty, old school death metal, bordering on brutal death metal, and technical death metal. And this band, I would say, went way more for the technical aspect because while this definitely has a ton of stuff that you're just going to listen to like, oh man, that sounds like Death, Obituary, Suffocation, Broken Hope, stuff like that, you're also going to hear some stuff that is like, wow, that is kind of a really unique approach. And oh my God, man, the riff changes on here are absolutely nuts.
Yeah, like hundreds of them. I mean, this thing is all over the map, yet very cohesive at the same time. I particularly got reminded a lot of earlier Gorguts, like Erosion of Sanity, especially when you get in the back half of the record. I'd say from the song Plague Birth all the way to the end to the title track, like, as this record goes on, it just gets more and more intense with how much it switches around. Like Plague Birth, that song is incredibly dynamic. There is a ton going on in there, from its opening where it starts out with these really cool death harmonies to going to flat out grindcore moments like Napalm Death, into thrash, into death doom. Like, it's a whole bunch of things, but encased all within that is somehow this cohesive batch of intricacies that all work really well, and that continues on throughout the record. From wild drum accents, like, I swear to God, that guy skipped neither leg day nor arm day, and it's just a mile a minute, and everything has a little hitch in it, kind of like on Death.
Yeah, honestly, like, the more I listen to this, I started hearing a lot of stuff that Undeath does, where they're a very straightforward, groovy band, but when you break down what they do, there's a lot of these clever hitches in terms of their grooves, like something that kind of accents it and gives it a, like, a little off-time bounce. And that is all over this album. And virtually every track, like right from the opening track, Coroner's Report, you hear these little hitches that just pop up and these really wild, intricate riffs. And this song in particular isn't like the most technical song. It definitely has technical moments, like there's tons of riff changes in it, but it's more straightforward in its approach. And as the album goes on, the album sort of unfurls itself and shows you how bizarre it can be.
Yeah, because from the rip in Coroner's Report, I was immediately reminded of Death. I was like, oh man, those are some great Death harmonies. This is going to be a great record, which it was. But like, I didn't think it was going to open up as much as it did. And actually, it really takes a little bit of time to get there. Random Decay, well, that is a very gross song and has a whole lot of incantation moments in it. And I absolutely love that. You still would actually never guess that this record is as technical as it's about to be based on the first couple tracks.
And part of that might be because all these songs were demoed at some point and they were demoed at different points. The first demo actually features, I believe, a lot of the tracks in the front half of this album, and the second one, the back half. And, you know, within a year, a band can totally change their sound or just start embracing different influences. And that's the approach you get here. So it almost kind of runs like a timeline of their influences, going from more straight ahead, like 90s death metal, to something that is wildly more technical and getting increasingly technical with each song, because the last song, the title track, is probably the most technical monster on the song. There are
easily
insane amounts of transitions in there. You have riffs from so many different camps on there, like not just your straightforward death metal riffs and heavy tremolos, they are on there, but you also have squealing, more dissonant ones, pinch harmonics everywhere. There's even some transitions in there that almost got to remind me of Dillinger Escape Plan.
Yeah, I think it's in the drum work, really. I think those transitions, I think that's where I would reach for Dillinger. Like, there's a lot of, like, wild snare work and a lot of crazy cymbal accents that cut up all these moments, but it's the way those moments are fired at you. It's really, really quick, just one after the other. As soon as you get locked into a groove, they're like, ain't happening. Here's 35 more.
And as the album went on, the transitions, I really feel like, happened a lot quicker. But when they land them, they're absolutely amazing. Yeah. Severe Psychopathology, probably my favorite track on here. The opening, very Leprosy-esque harmonies on there. And this one kind of stays a little bit more centered on, like, you know, just the tropes of, like, 90s death metal I love. You have solid, you know, more just straightforward riffs, but with, like, some cool angular play in there, too. But you also have, like, these big, dark, deep tremolos and blast beats. There's a little touch of atmosphere in the beginning with what sounds like a wind chime. That was like the one thing on his kit he hadn't hit at that point. The bridge, or at least what I think is the bridge on Severe Psychopathology, is absolutely nuts. Now, granted, the rest of the song is, you know, crazy in terms of its riff changes and just frequent shifts in mood, and it's just wild. But the lead section is particularly wild with the frequently shifting rhythms underneath. Like, it's a steady barrage of just insane shredding, but underneath you have this crazy shifting drum pattern from blasts to D beats and these crazy off-time fills. It's a lot to absorb, especially with this wild lead work on here.
It's so much that it actually caught me off guard, almost to the point of where I was losing the groove when I was headbanging along, because it switches that quickly. And the first time it did it, I wasn't ready for it. And I was like, there's that hitch. Okay, there it is. And they did it a couple times in a row, and I actually thought the second time was really cool, because then I was looking for it, and it happened, and I was like, sweet, I heard it right. And lead work, for the most part, sometimes I have complaints about leads in metal, about how they don't exactly match up to the song, per se, looking at you, Kerry King. But in this case, I don't have that many gripes about them, because they are matching the ferocity of the wild songs themselves. And this guy is just shredding his balls off, and he does it throughout every lead, like in Personality Conflict, where it's this wild tapping lead that leads into a series of dive bombs that also leads into just, again, crazy melodic shredding that somehow fits with the craziness of the song.
And that song is wild. Again, like, that's another one towards the back half of the album where it gets increasingly more technical. And this is where, like, I feel like the measures of riffs really started to change. Like, this is where it started reminding me more of bands like Ulthar, and horrendous. Like, the measures themselves, they don't necessarily follow like the same pattern every time. Like, sometimes they cut off sooner and go into like a weird accent, or again like a hitch, and sometimes they just completely change altogether, shifting into like, you know, apocalyptic tremolos for a second, then back to this weird proggy angular stuff. It's jarring, but at the same time, I don't know, like, I was kind of like drawn into it just because I kind of like technical music that isn't just, you know, your standard tech death.
Yeah. And for me, I had a special moment in time, because what death metal record is great without dissonance and atonal harmonies? And that's what's in that song.
This album goes down a multitude of different avenues, as we're kind of alluding to. Like, there's even like some doomier moments. Random Decay has these slower, more plotting riffs, like big incantation vibes. Like, you even get the little squealies in the end there to kind of give it like a extra little bit of like gnarliness. And even the vocals kind of shift around on that one too, because a lot of the vocals on here are, I'd say, like more of a roar than they are a growl. They're really well projected and they sound ferocious at all times. But on that song in particular, you get some more ghastly vocals, like a little extra tardy-ish phlegm kind of came up in the throat, and like, oh yeah, let's just keep that. It sounded wonderful.
He really reminds me of Chris from Skeletal Remains. Like, that was the very first thing I heard when this guy opened his mouth and started growling. The production, albeit a little bit dry, is okay. Everything cuts through the mix. First of all, the drums, I love the drums. Very natural sounding, and that snare has a real great pop to it. But the cool thing about something like this is usually when things are overly technical, usually the cymbals kind of tend to drown out a little bit, and they don't. They all cut through the mix really well. I can hear everything that this guy's doing. The guitar has a particularly gnarly crunch to it that's pretty neat. The bass I just thought was a little bit warm, which was odd, but it worked out really well. I don't have any real gripes about the production other than the fact that it's a little dry, but again, it works for this album.
Yeah, that's about the only complaint I really have is, you know, it's dry, and it is kind of like noticeable when the leads come in.
Yeah.
The lead tone does sound extra crispy, like, you know, like they could have, you know, fatten it up a little bit. But I really like the drum production in particular too.
Yeah.
And again, like cymbal work, I think it does really shine in here. It doesn't sound like a dull hiss anytime he hits anything. Like, and it sounds like he's beating the shit out of everything he's playing, which I generally like hearing that in my death metal anyway. Maybe it was a kid like his ex-girlfriend bought him or something like that. He said, you know what? Fuck this kid.
He put pictures of her face on all the toms and the snare and just... I get it.
As far as any like real negatives on here, I will say that sometimes it does get a little too busy for its own good. Like, you can kind of lose the sense of the song. That really hit me on the title track.
Yeah.
The title track is absolutely bonkers. I would say it's easily the most technical track on the album. And while it has a lot of cool riffs on it, they don't hang on to them long enough. And again, the measures are odd. The transitions are lightning fast. Like, you blink, you miss them entirely. It has its fun moments. Like, I do like this little D beat section with the fun harmonies on there. It's kind of like a little bit of a boogie to it. It's like, oh, that's kind of fun, oddly.
Shake your booty to tech death. Yeah, I mean, it's everything but the kitchen sink. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually used a whiteboard to write all this crap down and then stared at it while they jammed, because there's no way. There are easily... I say 40 transitions, and I say that jokingly, but at the same time, like, it's just a constant shift, and it's sporadic too, and you never know when that's coming, nor what stylistic approach they're going to take when they switch to it. And I'm just like, Jesus, you guys, I like tech death, but Jesus Christ.
And the contrast between some of the earlier stuff, or at least like stuff that was on the first demo versus the second demo in terms of like the technical play, it can be night and day. Like, Repulsive Death is probably the most stripped down song on here. Yeah. It's got thrashy elements, it's got some galloping blasts, and a good straightforward, like, kind of obituary / bull thrower kind of groove to it.
Yeah.
But the difference here is they are, you know, transitioning less often, and they're kind of sticking with these parts. And these parts aren't like, you know, they aren't introducing like whole new sections in the song for the most part. It's kind of between a few different sections.
Well, it's a very short song too, so when you think about things like technical death metal, you know, you gotta make the songs a little bit longer to allow all those moments to fit in one basket. But in this case, the song was shorter, so they're not trying to cram as much down your throat either. I like that kind of straightforward approach too. It helped to actually transition to the next section of the record, which was Bonkers.
And again, this is very comparable to like a lot of stuff that came out of the whole Chicago or Illinois scene in terms of death metal. In fact, this was actually produced by Marty Payne, which, if you're familiar with Olympic Records, that was the guy that started it and owned it for a period before Century Media bought it. I still have some samplers from Olympic Records. They had some badass bands on there.
The more you know.
But yeah, overall, I'm still going to give this 4 stars. Like, I'm still super impressed with this. It is technical without coming off as like super pretentious. Like, it's still gritty. It's still raw. The doomier sections sound evil and just sinister. And again, it's very busy, but at the same time, I like what it's being busy with. I do think it gets a little bit more off the rails towards the end of the album, culminating in one absolutely bonkers title track. But most of these tracks I absolutely love. Severe Psychopathology and probably Plague Birth are my big standouts in here, but honestly, I liked every track in here. This is just gnarly, riffy fun that definitely aspired to be more than just meat and potatoes death metal. If you're a big fan of, again, like early Gorguts, but specifically Erosion of Sanity, some later death, some early death, a little bit of obituary here and there, and then surprisingly stuff that is a little bit more akin to like Horrendous, Ulthar, like more old school technical death metal bands that are kind of like retroactive like that. Check this out. Damn good album.
I'm going to go ahead and agree and give it 4 stars. Technical death metal is fun, especially when it's not filled with wankery. And none of this, I would say, is wankery. There is a lot going on. There are a lot of transitions. Like, they are definitely thinking outside the box, but none of it felt pretentious. None of it felt like it wasn't really planned out really well. Like, everything had a place. It was like a giant playroom, and there were toys all over the floor, but at the end of the day, everything had its place, and that's kind of, I think, what they meant to do here. Jam-packed full of awesome riffing, amazing drum work. Again, I applaud the drum work on this record. The songs, for as crazy as they are, all had remarkably catchy moments in them. There definitely weren't moments that you could catch on to and be like, yeah, I can jam on that. That's a real hook. That's not what happened. But there were moments scattered throughout this record that were actually very catchy. Packed with a bunch of stuff I like too. Crazy riffs, great drum beats, dissonant atonal harmonies, a bunch of doom moments. For as scatterbrained as this was, it was very entertaining, and I applaud that. Much like Nick said, if you're a fan of bands like, again, early Gorguts, most notably Erosion of Sanity, I wouldn't duck too far outside of there. Death, Napalm Death, Autopsy, Undeath, newer bands like Antigmatum, there's some definite incantation moments going on here, even a little bit of Black Sabbath, you'll hear it. If you're a fan of any of that and you really just want a band to kind of challenge your brain a little bit, I'd give this a listen. This was worth it.
So, like with all these, what happened? Well, your guess is as good as mine, because again, the amount of information there is on this band is very sparse, but this band did break up in 1995, not too long after this album was released. Before this band broke up, there were some member changes. Nick actually left the band and ended up drumming for Cyanide for a little bit, I think only 1 year. He was replaced by one Brian Stream of the band Epitaph, which is not like probably an Epitaph, it's more of a Chicago death metal band that was I would say like more of a local act, like they never got past the demo stage. But I believe he was the last drummer they had before breaking up. Either that or he stepped in and played for Nick a couple of times and Nick came back. I don't know. Again, like it didn't even have like the timestamps like in terms of like each member's tenure in the band. It just didn't say like, no, they were in the band. When? I don't know, fucking hell. Usually the archives are pretty handy with this information. Not in this case. Also, Daniel Moore left the band as well. He was replaced by Larry Mancini of the band Afterlife, which was another more underground, I believe, death metal act out of the Chicago area. And that was it. They broke up. And the reasoning, I mean, it's hard to say. You probably have to actually like talk to the guys like, all right, breaking up in 1995 as a death metal band. Yeah, death metal, it wasn't even doing particularly well in 93. Like, this is where the cracks were starting to show and, bands were starting to drift away from the sound. You started getting more of that groove metal thing popping up. And that could have been it. There could have been disenchantment with the music industry. That often happens. Like you go on the road and, you know, you didn't get like the big shining moment, or people didn't get into your band as much, you didn't sell as much merch. You know, a lot of different factors. I know that Brad kept going in terms of bands he was in. He actually joined or started a stoner doom act called Tumblr. I don't know what Tumblr is, but he was in that band from 1998 to 2008, and he is currently back to his death metal roots with the band Absconder. He's been there since 2010, and I believe he might be a founding member of that band. So yeah, that is pretty much it, at least as far as I could find in terms of the history of Morgue. But I can tell you that they did leave behind one absolutely killer, underrated album. And I mean, I feel like if you've dove into the whole Chicago death metal scene or Illinois death metal scene as a whole, you've probably run across this album. But if you haven't, I strongly recommend checking it out. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and our only perk is doing live streams as a members only thing where we talk about a variety of topics. We're trying to kind of like center on like, you know, one particular thing rather than just do the usual chit chat ones. Who knows? We might just end up doing the usual chit chat ones because those are pretty fun. We also have gloriously stupid emojis, and I'm probably going to add more too, just because we're us. And this is pretty much the new way to support the channel if you'd like. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our hats and shirts. That is linked down below in the video description. And again, if you would like to become a member of this channel and brag to anyone that would fucking care, there is a join button down below, so you can go ahead and do that.
As always, tons of stuff going on at Thralls of Metal. Album reviews, discography rankings, discussion forums, live streams, members-only live streams, states of metal, is it metal, is it not metal, Nick's never-ending collection updates, What's John Jamming is making a return. I can say that confidently because I'm working on an episode as we speak. We appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of this channel. We're about to hit 20,000 subscribers. By the way, there is a video floating around out there. If you click on that video and watch it and leave a comment, you are entered to win a giveaway from Thralls of Metal for 20,000 subscribers. You get a shirt and a hat and a bunch of download codes, as well as a couple CDs, including one from the band Convulsus. They're some friends of ours, a good thrash band out of Detroit. Thank you for being a part of this channel. Thank you for continually tuning in and interacting with us. It means the absolute world to us. And Nick, tell them more.
Yeah, you guys flat out rule. It is amazing doing this 6 years in, and yeah, it's crazy. But it's been a lot of fun, and you guys are large in part one of the reasons why it's so much fun. That and the metal, we got to give that credit too.
I guess so, yeah.
But yeah, tons more coming in the future. So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.